They said I overreacted. But imagine watching your whole family laugh while your cake hits the ground, your mother joins in, and your sister films it for TikTok. I didn't argue. I didn't post a thing. 3 days later, the uncut footage went viral. Her voice caught on camera, mine caught in silence. By the time the truth hit the headlines, my name was cleared, and theirs were ruined. I'm Claire Bennett, and this is how quiet justice sounds. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The string lights blinked softly over the Collins' backyard, the kind of golden glow that looks beautiful in photos but feels too warm, too staged. The smell of barbecue mixed with perfume and cut grass. It was supposed to be my graduation party, my moment after years of working double shifts, finishing night classes, paying my own tuition. But somehow it didn't feel like mine at all. Linda, my mother, was standing by the buffet table, laughing that loud hostess laugh she saved for guests. "Can you believe it?" she said to one of her friends. "Amanda's department is offering her a full-time teaching position next semester." I smiled faintly from a few feet away, pretending to listen, pretending to belong. Amanda beamed in her floral dress, perfect hair, perfect posture, her son, Ethan, darting between the tables with a balloon sword. Every conversation seemed to orbit around her. I was the planet on the edge, quiet and distant, invisible. The speakers played soft pop music, and someone handed me a paper plate. I glanced at the cake sitting at the far corner of the table, a white frosted rectangle with blue lettering. "Congratulations, Claire." It looked almost embarrassed to be there, wedged between a bowl of potato salad and a stack of plastic cups. No candles, no announcement, just melting frosting in the heat. "Claire, take a photo of us," Amanda called. Amanda, she was standing next to Mom, her arm looped around her waist. I lifted the phone and pressed the button, capturing their smiles. 2 versions of pride that never included me. "You should get in the next one," I offered. Amanda laughed. "It's fine, we've got enough of the graduate in the cake." I went to refill the lemonade when Ethan ran past, almost knocking the pitcher. "Careful, buddy," I said softly. He grinned, mischievous. "Sorry, Aunt Claire." He darted to the dessert table, and before I could say anything, his little hand pushed against the edge of the cake board. Time slowed. The cake slid teetered, and then hit the grass with a dull, wet thud. Frosting splattered across the patio. Blue letters smudged into white. For a second, no one moved. Then laughter exploded around the table. Amanda raised her phone, still recording. "Oh, come on," she said between giggles. "It's just cake. Lighten up." Ethan looked back at me with a wide grin. "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Claire." The laughter grew louder, spilling into the yard. My mother's voice rose above the rest, clear, bright, unbothered. I stood there, a knife still in my hand, surrounded by people who thought this was funny. My chest felt hollow, but my face stayed still. I looked at Mom. She didn't look away. For a moment, I thought she'd say something, tell him to apologize, stop the laughter. But she just smiled, that same practiced smile she'd given the guests all afternoon. I took a slow breath, feeling the tremor in my fingers. The knife touched the table as I set it down carefully, the metal clinking against wood. The laughter blurred into background noise. I untied the cheap white apron Mom had made me wear. It looks domestic cute for pictures, and folded it neatly, placing it beside the ruined cake. Amanda was still holding her phone, the red recording light blinking. "Claire," she said between laughs, "don't look so serious. It's just a joke." I met her eyes and saw nothing there. No shame, no understanding, just amusement. I didn't answer. The air felt thick, like it had been drained of oxygen. I walked past them, each step slow, deliberate. Someone called after me, but I couldn't make out the words. My ears rang with the echo of their laughter. The grass crunched under my shoes as I crossed the yard toward the driveway. Inside my chest, something sharp and small twisted. Not anger yet, just the quiet realization that this had never been my celebration. It was theirs. It always had been. At the car, I stopped. The night was settling, fireflies flickering in the hedges. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. Behind me, I could still hear Amanda's voice, playful, distant. She's always so sensitive. More laughter followed, fading into the hum of conversation. I sat in the driver's seat, keys in hand, staring at the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger. Someone trying not to cry, someone who'd run out of ways to explain herself. I started the engine. The headlights washed over the fence, illuminating the bits of white frosting scattered on the ground like fallen snow. As I pulled out onto the street, I caught one last glimpse of the backyard in the mirror. The lights, the laughter, the broken cake. My voice came quietly, almost a whisper, the words forming without thought. Sometimes the moment that breaks you doesn't need to be loud. The sound of the party faded behind me until it was just the hum of the tires against the road, and the silence I carried finally felt heavier than the noise I'd left behind. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of my phone buzzing on the counter. I ignored it at first. I was still in the clothes from the party, my shoes half kicked off, mascara smudged beneath my eyes. But the buzzing didn't stop. I reached for the phone, the glow lighting up the dim kitchen. Amanda's name filled the screen. Her TikTok handle, the familiar profile photo of her with Ethan on the beach. The caption read, "When your sister finally graduates, but still can't keep it together," followed by laughing emojis. Graduation hat's a slice of cake. The thumbnail was the exact moment Ethan's hands hit the table. I clicked play. The laughter burst through the tiny speaker louder than I remembered. My mother's voice, Amanda's giggle. Ethan's "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Claire." They were all there. It looped twice before I realized the numbers climbing in the corner. 5,000 views, 10,000, 20. Comments flickering like sparks. She looks so mad. That's some family roast. Y'all are savage. My stomach twisted. I leaned against the counter, pressing the phone to my chest, as if I could crush the sound out of it. I could feel my pulse in my ears, sharp and fast. For a moment, I thought I might throw the phone across the room. Instead, I set it face down. They filmed my humiliation like it was a gift. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. My voice didn't sound like mine. I turned off the lights and stood in the dark, staring out the window at the street below. People walked dogs, a couple laughed near a car, normal life carried on. I didn't sleep that night. Every few minutes, the phone buzzed again. Notifications, new comments, more likes. By morning, the number had doubled. At 8, I put on my gray blazer and went to work. The air outside was cold wet with Seattle mist. The walk to the Pulse Media Group building felt longer than usual. Inside, the usual chatter in the open office went quiet as I passed. A few glances, half smiles that weren't really smiles. Someone whispered, then pretended to look at their monitor. At the coffee station, a young designer named Kevin held up his phone. "Claire, you're trending," he said, almost amused. "Your sister's video. Crazy stuff. Family's got jokes, huh?" I gave him a polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, hilarious. I walked straight to my desk and opened my laptop, though I couldn't remember what I was supposed to be working on. The chatter returned in low waves behind me. My inbox was full of unread emails, but my eyes caught on the subject line of one HR meeting. Today, at 11:00 At 10:55, Lauren Pierce, my manager, appeared at my cubicle. Her expression was gentle, but guarded. "Claire, can you step into my office?" The walls of her office were glass, but she closed the blinds as I sat down. I wanted to talk before HR. She began. "You've been here 3 years. You're good at what you do. But this video, it's circulating fast. People are talking. Clients, too." I clasped my hands together to stop them from shaking. "It's not something I can control," I said evenly. I know. She exhaled. "Still, it's creating a tension that the company isn't comfortable with. I think it would be best if you took a few days off until this settles down." I nodded. "So I'm suspended?" Lauren hesitated. "I wouldn't call it that. Just step back for a bit. Let things cool." "Sure," I said. "I understand." She smiled with relief, but it didn't reach her eyes either. When I left her office, I could feel the weight of every gaze on me. The walk to the elevator felt like walking underwater. Each ping of the descending floor number echoed in my chest. Outside, rain had started to fall thin and cold. I pulled my coat tight and headed toward the bus stop. The city was gray buses hissing past puddles, the faint hum of life moving on. I told myself not to cry. Not for them. Not again. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes and dropped my bag by the couch. My phone was still buzzing on the counter. Without thinking, I picked it up. A new message flashed on the screen. It was from Mom. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." I stared at it. The words looked foreign, like something out of a legal document instead of a text from your own mother. A small red heart appeared below it. Amanda's reaction. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but there was nothing left to say. I placed the phone face down on the table. The vibration echoed against the wood once, twice, then stopped. I opened the cabinet, pulled out a wine glass, uncorked the bottle sitting half empty on the counter. I started to pour, then stopped. Instead, I reached for a glass of water, filled it, and sat at the small kitchen table. The light above me flickered slightly. The silence felt heavy, like it had substance. That night I learned something simple and brutal. They didn't want my silence. They wanted my absence. I finished the water, rinsed the glass, and turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, the phone screen glowed faintly across the room, still lit with that message, "Sever all contact." The words reflected in the window, hovering over the city lights like a verdict. I sat there until the glow dimmed, until the last buzz of notification stopped. And all that was left was the quiet rhythm of the rain against the glass. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. It tapped against the windows like a slow metronome while I sat on the couch laptop balanced on my knees. The screen glowed pale blue, reflecting numbers I already knew by heart, my budgeting spreadsheet color-coded and meticulous, my one small attempt at control in a world that kept taking pieces of me. 2 lines near the top blinked back at me, highlighted in red. Mortgage payment $420. Auto loan $670. Payees: Linda Collins and Amanda Collins. Co-signer Claire Bennett. The cursor blinked beside the date. June 2023. I scrolled back through the years. Every month the same deductions, clean and consistent. I clicked on the first email from my mother in the thread dated March 2020. Her words popped up in their gentle, practiced tone. "Sweetheart, it's just for a few months. Your father's between jobs and you're so good with money, you'll barely notice it." I remembered reading it 3 years ago, sitting at my old kitchen table, believing her. I believed a lot of things then. I whispered into the quiet apartment. I thought that was love. Turns out it was a leash wrapped in thank yous. The words came out low, steady, without anger, like I'd rehearsed them somewhere in my sleep. I opened a new browser tab and logged into my online banking portal. The transactions loaded every withdrawal tied to accounts I didn't touch, houses. I didn't live in cars, I didn't drive. My name sat there trapped in digital ink. I clicked chat with representative. A small box popped up. "Hi, Claire. How can we help you today?" I typed fast. "I need to confirm if I'm still listed as a co-signer on 2 loans. One under Linda Collins, one under Amanda Collins." After a moment, the reply came. "Yes, you are currently a co-signer on both accounts. Would you like to make a payment?" My jaw tightened. "No." I typed, "I'd like to stop." The cursor blinked for a long time before the agent responded. "I'm afraid that isn't possible unless both primary borrowers request removal, or the loans are refinanced." I stared at the words until they blurred. "Of course," I muttered. "They built their safety net out of me." I ended the chat and closed the laptop. The rain outside had grown heavier, hitting the glass in uneven bursts. I leaned back into the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every nerve felt awake, humming beneath my skin. 3 years of paying for their comfort. 3 years of thinking I was doing the right thing. I reached for my phone, scrolled to my contacts, and stopped at one name, Eleanor Hayes, financial attorney. We'd met through work once. She'd given a guest seminar about protecting creative freelancers from exploitative contracts. I remembered how clear she'd been, how her voice didn't shake even when she told a room full of executives. "No one owns your worth." I started typing. "Eleanor, this is Claire Bennett. I need urgent financial advice. My family has been using my name for loans I don't control. They've cut contact, and I need to know my options." I reread the message once, twice, then hit send before I could change my mind. The air in the apartment felt different afterward, colder, heavier, but cleaner somehow. I sat there for a long time, hands clasped, listening to the rain. Eventually I got up and walked to the bookshelf. A thin layer of dust coated the top row. I pulled out the cardboard tube that held my diploma, still unopened since the day I brought it home. I slid out the rolled parchment and uncurled it carefully. University of Washington. Bachelor of Communications. Claire Bennett. The letters shimmered faintly under the lamp. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the proof of every night I'd spent studying between shifts. Every morning I'd walked into class half awake, but determined. I'd imagined hanging it one day in an office, or maybe a new apartment, as a reminder that I'd built something on my own. Now it just looked like another promise I'd kept for people who'd never notice. I pressed the paper flat against the coffee table, tracing the edge with my thumb. My hands were shaking again. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the sound. The city looked washed out through the window. Gray sky, silver rain, distant cranes stretching into the mist. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was quieter. Sharper something that sat deep in my chest. A kind of clarity. For years I'd told myself that family debt was shared out of love, that helping them was proof of loyalty, not evidence of being taken for granted. But love shouldn't cost monthly installments. I picked up the diploma again, held it under the lamplight until the ink gleamed. My name stared back at me, proud and lonely. This, I said out loud, is the only thing I've ever paid for that belonged entirely to me. I rolled it back into the tube, slid it into the drawer beside the couch, and shut it gently. The rain softened into a drizzle. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's dog barked once, then fell silent. I leaned my head back, eyes open to the ceiling, waiting for Eleanor's reply. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like space, room to breathe, room to plan. The laptop chimed once, a new email notification appearing at the corner of the screen. I didn't open it yet. I just stared at the subject line. Eleanor Hayes. Let's talk. I exhaled slowly and closed my eyes. For the first time, the weight on my chest didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the start of something deliberate, something I'd never allowed myself before. The rain kept falling steady and unhurried, as if the city itself was whispering. Enough. The cafe smelled like burnt espresso and rain-soaked coats. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, glinting off the metal edges of tables. I'd arrived early, too anxious to sit still, stirring the same cup of coffee until it turned cold. When Eleanor Hayes finally walked in, she was exactly as I remembered her. Tall, calm, silver-gray hair swept back neatly, her presence so composed it made the room quieter. She set a leather folder on the table and smiled polite but professional. "Claire," she said, shaking my hand. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I murmured. 3 years, maybe. We sat. I told her everything. The party, the video, the text from my mother, the loans. Every word came out sharper than I expected, like glass that had been cracking for years and was finally giving way. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She just took notes, her pen moving in steady strokes, the kind that made you feel your story was being documented, not doubted. When I finished, she leaned back. "They refinanced," she said simply. "They used your name on the new contracts, which means your liability started over when they did that. Without your consent, that's fraud." My throat tightened. "Can I get out of it?" She folded her hands. "Yes, you have the right to remove yourself as a co-signer, but Claire doing that will force them to carry the full debt. If they can't, the house and the car could go into default. It'll destroy their credit." I looked down at my hands, the faint coffee ring on the table between us. "They built their comfort on my name," I said slowly. "It's time they rebuild on theirs." Eleanor studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "All right, let's do this properly. You'll need documentation of your employment, your current address, and any correspondence proving they acted without permission." I reached into my bag and handed her a small stack of printed emails. The top one was from my mother. "Sweetheart, it's just a formality. You won't be responsible for anything." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That'll help." She stood, gathering her folder. "We'll go to the bank together. Today." We stepped out into the gray morning. The wind had picked up, carrying that damp chill Seattle keeps even in summer. I followed her down Pine Street to the glass tower that held North Shore Trust Bank. The lobby was cold, polished, and smelled faintly of disinfectant. A receptionist led us to a private conference room where a man in a navy suit was waiting. "Ms. Bennett," he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. "Dean Walsh, branch manager." He turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Hayes, always a pleasure." We sat at the long table. He opened a folder in front of him, scrolling through files on his tablet. "I've reviewed the accounts you mentioned," he said. "Linda Collins and Amanda Collins, 2 active loans. Mortgage refinanced in March 2021, vehicle refinanced in July 2022. Both list you as co-signer." He looked up. "Your digital signature was used in both. Were you aware of that?" "No," I said. "I never signed or authorized those." Eleanor leaned forward. "That means the signature was either copied or forged. Under federal lending law, that's a violation. We're requesting immediate removal of my client's name and an internal fraud review." Dean's gaze flicked between us. I'll need confirmation you have no financial interest in either property. Eleanor opened her folder and slid a thick envelope across the table. Lease agreement, pay stubs, bank statements. Proof she hasn't made use of or lived in either property since 2019. He read through the papers silently. The only sound was the quiet buzz of the air conditioning. After a minute, he exhaled softly and reached for a red stamp. Everything checks out, he said. Ms. Bennett, this will start the cosigner removal process. We'll also escalate the signature issue to our legal department for investigation. He clicked the stamp against the paper, one clean thud that echoed louder than it should have. Dean looked at me. Are you sure you want to go through with this? They'll be notified immediately. They could lose their home. I met his eyes steady. They lost me long before they lose anything else. For a second, no one spoke. The air felt still, almost reverent. Dean nodded and signed his name beside mine. The sound of the pen scratching against paper felt like cutting a cord. Eleanor gathered the documents, tucking them into her folder. We'll receive confirmation by next week, she said. From here on, Claire, they're fully responsible for their debt. We walked out together, the echo of our footsteps following us through the lobby. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the umbrella. Cars hissed past on the wet pavement. Do you want to ride home? She asked. I shook my head. I'll walk. She gave a small nod. You did the right thing. Sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to teach people respect. I watched her car pull away, taillights glowing red through the drizzle. The city looked softer in the rain, indifferent but clean. I stood on the sidewalk, the folder pressed against my chest. Somewhere in that building behind me, an email had already been sent to my mother and sister. The ties were officially cut, not by text this time, but by law. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the smell of wet concrete coffee and freedom that didn't quite feel real yet. I wasn't taking revenge. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the ground. Monday came too fast. The sky was the same dull gray it always was in Seattle, but the air felt heavier as I pushed through the glass doors of Pulse Media Group. My ID card beeped against the reader, the sound too loud in the quiet lobby. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the first thing I noticed wasn't the hum of computers or the smell of burnt coffee. It was silence. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. 2 interns standing by the break room froze when they saw me. One of them lowered her phone, the screen still lit with the frozen image of my face in that stupid backyard frosting smeared on the ground. I walked past them without saying a word. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step loud enough to fill the space they'd emptied with their silence. At my desk, my inbox was full of unread emails. I pretended to read them while glancing at the reflection on my monitor. Kevin, from design, leaned toward his coworker, whispering something. She shook her head, not looking at me. I shut the laptop and stood. Is Lauren in her office? I asked quietly. Kevin flinched a little, pretending to adjust his glasses. Yeah. She's expecting you. Her office door was half open. The blinds were half-drawn sunlight cutting thin slats across the carpet. She looked up as I entered. 2 people from HR were already sitting there, one with a notepad, the other clutching a corporate-branded water bottle, like it could protect her from conflict. Lauren gestured to the chair across from her. Claire, thanks for coming in. The tone was careful, rehearsed, the same one she used with clients who were about to lose their contracts. I sat. My pulse was steady, my hands folded on my lap. Lauren inhaled. This is uncomfortable for everyone. I know how hard this must be for you. But after the events of the past week, and the online attention it's drawn, we've decided it's best if you take some time off. One of the HR reps added softly. Effective today, you'll be on temporary leave. You'll still receive pay for the next 2 weeks. I looked straight at Lauren. Did you watch the video? She hesitated. Yes. My lips curved just slightly. Then you've seen enough. Lauren's eyes flickered guilt, cutting through her practiced calm. Claire, this isn't punishment. It's fine, I said, standing before she could finish. I get it. Clients don't want distraction. Claire, I understand. My voice didn't rise, didn't break. It just ended the conversation. I walked out, the sound of my heels clicking like punctuation. Marcus caught up to me at the elevator. He was holding a folder, his tie slightly crooked, his face drawn. Hey, he said softly, keeping his voice low. Don't let them win. Take your time, come back stronger. I turned toward him. I'm not fighting them, Marcus. Not this way. He nodded, though his eyes said he didn't understand. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in. Outside, the air was sharp and damp. I stood under the awning for a moment, watching the city move. People with umbrellas, buses splashing through puddles, delivery bikes weaving through traffic. The world hadn't stopped, even if mine had. I walked to the curb, the weight of the last few hours pressing against my ribs. Across the street, a billboard for Pulse's newest campaign flashed with the slogan, "I'd helped write, trust builds everything." The irony almost made me laugh. A phone buzz pulled me back. I looked down at the screen. "Eleanor Hayes, Claire," she said the moment I answered. Her voice was brisk, but there was something almost warm beneath it. "The bank confirmed everything this morning. They've processed your cosigner removal and launched an internal fraud inquiry." For a second, I couldn't find words. "That fast, yes. Dean Walsh expedited it himself. You're officially free of both accounts. Your name's clean." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, closing my eyes. The relief didn't come with fireworks, just a quiet exhale that felt like my lungs were relearning how to breathe. "Thank you," I said. Eleanor's tone softened. "Stay quiet for now. Don't reach out. Don't respond. The law will do the talking." When we hung up, I stood there watching the rain bead on the edge of my coat. I thought of the office behind me, the stairs, the whispers. I thought of my mother's text, Amanda's heart emoji, the laughter from that night echoing like a loop I couldn't shut off. Maybe dignity wasn't something people could take away. Maybe it was something you either surrendered or carried even when no one could see it. The bus roared past, spraying water onto the sidewalk, but I didn't move, and my reflection rippled in a puddle near my feet. Tired eyes pressed lips a woman standing alone on a busy street. Honor, I realized, could be suspended like a job. But dignity, it stayed with you even when the world tried to write you out of the story. I turned away from the office and started walking, the city noise swallowing the silence that had followed me out the door. The knock came just as the rain started again. Soft, hesitant, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I almost didn't open it. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family since the text that ended everything, and I didn't expect that to change. But something in the rhythm of the knocking, 3 short, 1 long, made me pause. When I unlocked the door, my father was standing there, water dripping from his umbrella-gray hair plastered to his forehead. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit jacket was damp, his tie uneven. In his hand was a plain manila envelope, edges curling from the rain. "Hi, Dad. Hi, sweetheart." His voice was low, rough. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He closed the umbrella, careful not to drip too much on the hardwood. The smell of rain and old cologne filled the air. "I don't know where to start," he said after a long silence. "But your mother, she's wrong. And I should have said that a long time ago." I crossed my arms. "You knew about the loans." He nodded slowly. "I knew she asked for help. I didn't know she forged your signature on the new papers, not until last week." The words didn't sting. They just settled like something I'd already guessed. "So why are you here now?" He hesitated, then held up the envelope. "Because there's something you need to see." I led him to the kitchen table. He slid the envelope across the surface, his hands trembling slightly. I pulled out a small USB drive, its plastic casing cracked. "It's the full video," he said quietly. "Amanda cut out part of it before she uploaded it. The part where she tells Ethan what to do." "Make her face red," she said. "It'll be funny." My breath caught. I stared at him, but his eyes were steady, guilt clouded but clear. I didn't want to believe it. He continued, "But I heard it myself. They turned it into a joke. They made you look hysterical." I plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered and the video opened. The image was shaky, taken from the patio. Amanda's laughter filled the speakers, too loud, too familiar. "Come on, Ethan," she said, voice sugar-sweet. "Make her face red. It'll be funny." Then the sound of the cake hitting the ground. The laughter. My silence. I hit pause. The frame froze on Amanda's smile, wide and bright like a commercial for cruelty. My hands clenched into fists. The screen's glow painted the kitchen walls cold and blue. Dad's voice broke the silence. "You don't have to forgive them, Claire. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know. I don't want them to rewrite what happened." I swallowed hard, trying to find something to say. but words felt useless, too small for what was sitting in my chest. "Thank you," I managed. "For bringing it," he nodded, eyes glistening, but dry. "You didn't deserve any of this." When he left, he squeezed my shoulder. It was the kind of touch that felt like an apology built from decades of silence. Then he stepped into the rain, his umbrella blooming open like a black flower. I watched until he disappeared down the street. The apartment was quiet again, except for the patter of rain against glass. I sat at the table, staring at the paused video. My face on screen looked calm, almost serene, but I remembered how it felt. My heart pounding, the laughter slicing through me like static. I forwarded the file to Eleanor. My fingers didn't shake this time. The message was short. "We have proof." Her reply came minutes later. "Now we have both law and truth." I read it twice, letting the words sink in. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the sound of rain filling the silence. My reflection shimmered faintly in the dark window. Eyes steady, mouth set, posture straight. For most of my life, silence had been my way of surviving. When Mom criticized, when Amanda laughed, when the world pretended not to see. I'd thought silence was weakness, the absence of defense. But sitting there, the weight of truth in my hands, I realized silence could also be a blade. It could cut clean without warning, without noise. Outside, the storm eased into a steady drizzle, washing the city in silver light. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, feeling the faint vibration of thunder rolling somewhere over Puget Sound. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry about. I was done asking why they did it, done searching for apologies that would never come. The truth was mine, now carved in pixels and sound undeniable. I whispered into the empty room. "You wanted me quiet. You should have remembered. Quiet doesn't mean powerless." The rain slowed to a soft hiss, and for the first time in months, the silence in my apartment didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like resolve. The first thing I heard that morning was the constant ping of notifications. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, the screen lighting up again and again. I blinked into the gray Seattle light filtering through the blinds, half dreading whatever waited for me. When I finally picked it up, there were dozens of unread texts, missed calls, and a flood of new emails. One message stood out, from an old friend I hadn't spoken to since college. The subject line read, "You need to see this." I opened it. Inside was a link to an article on a news site I recognized, Coastal Tribune. The headline hit me like a cold wave. "Family humiliation gone too far." I sat up, heart racing, scrolling through the story. 2 paragraphs in, I froze. The article described everything. The video, the backyard, the laughter, but not the version the world had seen. The reporter, Nina Patel, had obtained the unedited video. She wrote that it had been sent anonymously by a woman named Holly, a friend from Amanda's university days. Nina detailed how she had verified the metadata, confirming that the clip posted online had been altered. The section Amanda cut out was quoted in black and white. "Make her face red. It'll be funny." Amanda Collins instructs her son before he shoves the cake onto the ground. Reading it felt like hearing thunder after lightning. The truth, loud and undeniable, finally catching up. By the time I reached the end of the article, my hands were trembling. It wasn't anger or joy, just the strange, steady release of something that had been clenched too long. The subheadline read, "When Humiliation Becomes Abuse." The article spread faster than I could refresh the page. Within an hour, Acha and Claire Bennett and Taj family. Humiliation were trending. The original TikTok had been deleted, but the damage was already done. The truth had become the story. I opened Twitter. People were reposting screenshots quoting the article, tagging my sister's account. "This is emotional cruelty." That poor woman, her silence said everything. For every comment that defended me, there were still those who treated it like entertainment. But it didn't matter. For once, I didn't have to explain. The video was explaining for me. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, phone buzzing beside me, headlines flashing across the screen. Amanda Collins loses teaching contract amid viral video backlash. Linda Collins' flower shop review bombed after daughter's scandal. "This isn't family drama," says reporter Nina Patel. "It's public humiliation disguised as humor." My mother's shop, Linda's Florals, had been the pride of her small Portland community. Now reviewers were posting 1-star ratings and comments like, "I wouldn't trust someone who laughs at their own child's pain." I read it all quietly, then set the phone down and stared into the dark surface of my coffee. Karma never rushes. It just waits for the right moment to arrive. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and glimmering. I stood by the window, watching traffic crawl past the skyline, blurred by mist. My reflection looked calm, but in need, there was still a hum of disbelief. Somewhere, Amanda would be watching her world unravel in real time. She had always been careful, polished, her reputation spotless. Now, the internet had found its new villain. The irony was that I didn't even feel satisfied. Just tired. I sat back down, scrolling again. The article had reached over 500,000 views. Beneath it, a comment pinned by the author read, "Every family has secrets, but when laughter replaces empathy, that's not love, it's control." I thought about that sentence for a long time. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Claire Bennett. Yes, this is Nina Patel with the Coastal Tribune. I just wanted to say thank you for not staying silent. I know you didn't send me the video, but your story is helping a lot of people see how emotional abuse hides behind family jokes. I swallowed hard. I didn't do anything. Sometimes surviving is enough, she said. Take care of yourself. After she hung up, I stared at the rain beginning to gather again on the glass. I didn't post a statement. I didn't comment. The silence was speaking louder than anything I could write. By afternoon, the story had reached national outlets. A talk show mentioned it during their segment on online bullying within families. Amanda's university issued a short press release. Professor Collins has been placed on leave pending review. Her influencer account vanished overnight. Her sponsorship deals dropped her. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something close to grief. The kind that comes when you realize justice doesn't heal you. It just removes the infection. That evening, I turned off my phone for the first time in days. The apartment went still again. The only sound was the kettle whistling softly. I poured myself a cup of tea instead of coffee this time, letting the warmth fill the quiet. Then just as I sat down, my phone buzzed once more. Vibration only. A voicemail from Lauren Pierce. I pressed play. Her voice was calm, steady. Claire, it's Lauren. We need to talk. And this time, I'm not going to let you stay silent. The message ended with the faint sound of her exhale, a tone of conviction beneath it. I set the phone down, the words echoing in the room. For the first time since this all began, I felt something shifting. Not in the world outside, but inside me. The storm had finally hit everyone else. But for me, it was starting to clear. The air inside Pulse Media Group felt different the next morning. Still tense, but charged like the moment before lightning breaks the sky. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, my reflection in the metal doors, looking calmer than I felt. My hands were steady this time. When I stepped into the conference room, the first thing I saw was Lauren standing at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of her shoulders, squared like she'd already made her decision. The board members sat in a semicircle, 7 of them, all in dark suits, faces half hidden behind their laptops. Claire Lauren said, nodding. Have a seat. I sat across from her. The room smelled like coffee and tension. Outside, the city was waking up, sunlight cutting sharp lines across the windows. One of the directors, a man with silver hair and an expensive watch, started the meeting. We appreciate you coming in, Ms. Bennett. Given recent media coverage, we're here to discuss how to move forward, both for you and for the company. Lauren's jaw tightened. Let's start with the facts, she said. The video was manipulated. A major outlet confirmed it. Claire was humiliated publicly, not because of anything she did, but because of her family's actions. She's the victim, not the cause. Another board member, a woman in her 50s, crossed her arms. Optics still matter. Clients associate our brand with professionalism, not personal drama. Lauren looked her straight in the eye. This isn't drama. This is dignity. A low murmur filled the room. I sat silently, letting the words hang. My palms rested flat on the table, grounding myself. Lauren continued, flipping through the pages. Our employee stood by company policy, never engaged with the media, never retaliated online. She did what any of us would hope an employee would do. She held her ground with grace. The silver-haired man frowned. But can we risk further attention? What if her family goes public again? Lauren leaned forward. Then we risk standing for something decent. Not everything has to be a PR move. The room fell quiet. For 30 minutes, the arguments went back and forth. Risk versus reputation policy versus principle. I listened, silent, absorbing every word. Lauren fought with a kind of calm fury that I hadn't seen before. At one point, someone muttered, "We can't be dragged into a family scandal." Lauren didn't miss a beat. It's not a scandal when the truth is on our side. When the vote finally came, hands went up, 5 in favor, 2 against. Lauren's smile was small but unmistakable. She turned to me. "Welcome back, Claire." I felt something inside me release, a knot that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "Thank you," I said quietly. Lauren gathered her papers. "And one more thing. There's a new campaign I want you to lead. Respect isn't a privilege, It's not about selling a product. It's about rebuilding trust." The title hit me like a heartbeat. "You're serious?" "Completely." Her voice softened. "It's your story, Claire. You should be the one to tell it." I nodded. "Then let's make it count." When the meeting ended, the board members filed out in silence. Lauren and I stood at the window looking down at the street 12 floors below. People were crossing with umbrellas, tiny dots moving through puddles. Lauren exhaled. "You know, when all this started, I thought I was protecting the company. Now I realize you were the one teaching us how to have a spine." I smiled faintly. "That's a nice change from being suspended." She laughed just once. "Go take a walk. Enjoy the day before it starts raining again." By the time I returned to my office, the space that had felt cold and foreign a week ago seemed new again. My coworkers looked up as I walked by. No whispering this time, no awkward smiles, just quiet nods, not pity. Respect. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, hitting the framed campaign posters along the wall. For the first time in a long time, I let myself stand there and just feel it. The warmth, the silence, the fact that I didn't have to prove anything anymore. You don't need an apology when people finally see you clearly. My phone buzzed. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen. "Good news," she said when I answered. "The bank finalized everything this morning. You're officially off both loans. Your mother and sister lost eligibility for any future credit, but you're completely free of liability." I let out a long breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Finally," I said. "Freedom that doesn't come with a price tag." "Exactly," she said, with a hint of pride. "You did what most people never dare to do. You set boundaries that stuck." When we hung up, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The air smelled faintly of rain and fresh coffee. I walked along the sidewalk, passing a newspaper stand. The bold headline of the Coastal Tribune caught my eye. "Local Hero of the Week. The woman who chose dignity over silence." Below it was a small picture of me walking out of the bank, umbrella in hand. I stared at it for a moment, then shook my head and smiled. Not because of pride, because for the first time I didn't need to defend the woman in that photo. She'd already done that herself. The glass walls of the conference room reflected everything: the fluorescent light, the rain streaking down the windows, the strained faces across the table. The smell of coffee and paper filled the air, sterile and heavy. Linda and Amanda sat side by side on one end, both dressed too formally, as if fabric could hide guilt. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Amanda's eyes darted toward me once, then dropped to the table. Across from them sat Eleanor Hayes, calm and composed, with her legal pad open. Dean Walsh. The branch manager leaned slightly forward, his expression unreadable. I sat between them, my pulse steady, my mind quiet. Linda broke the silence first. "We're not here for court or lawyers," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We just want to talk as a family." Eleanor didn't blink. Law and family overlap more than people think, Mrs. Collins. Amanda shifted in her chair. "It was a joke gone wrong," she said quickly, her voice thin. "You know that, Claire. No one meant to hurt you." I looked at her. "A joke you monetized," I said evenly. "You turned it into clicks, likes, and sponsorships. You filmed my humiliation and called it content." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't reply. Linda exhaled loudly. "Enough," she snapped. "I only did what I did to keep this family together. That house, your father and I would have lost it. You think you're better than us now because you make your own money." "I don't think I'm better," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "I just stopped paying to be treated worse." Linda's eyes flashed. "We're your parents. Everything you have started with us. You wouldn't even exist without us." Eleanor leaned slightly forward, tone controlled. Mrs. Collins, we're here to clarify financial and legal boundaries, not rewrite emotional ones. Linda turned to her sharply. You're just her lawyer. You don't understand. She's also my client, Eleanor said, her expression steel. And she's legally free from all your debts. Dean cleared his throat. We've verified the documents, he said. Claire Bennett has no financial obligation to either of you. The investigation also revealed irregularities in the refinancing paperwork. Linda stiffened. Irregularities? Eleanor opened the folder, sliding 2 printed documents across the table. These are copies of the signatures used for the refinance. The handwriting analyst confirmed your daughter's signature was copied from a previous document without her authorization. Amanda's head snapped toward her mother. You said she agreed. Linda's face drained of color. She began, but the word hung there unfinished. Dean looked between them. Using someone's signature without consent is considered fraud, Mrs. Collins. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers fumbled with the pearls around her neck, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since childhood. I just needed help, she whispered. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I sat back, watching her carefully. For the first time, there was no anger left in me, just exhaustion. You hurt me every time you called it help, I said quietly. You never asked. You assumed. The door opened behind us, and all heads turned. My father Robert stood there holding a folder of his own. His suit was wrinkled, his hair damp from the rain. Sorry I'm late, he said, stepping inside. I thought it was important I be here. Linda's eyes widened. Robert, what are you doing? He placed the folder on the table and looked directly at Dean. I have something to add. This is a written statement confirming Claire never consented to any refinancing or use of her signature. I also have the original unedited video file as additional evidence of manipulation. He turned to Linda, his voice steady but sad. The truth doesn't need sides. It just needs to be heard. Linda's lips trembled. She didn't speak. Amanda's face crumpled, shame mixing with panic. Eleanor gathered the papers, flipping through them efficiently. Thank you, Mr. Collins. That will complete our record. The room went silent, except for the sound of the rain hitting the glass. My mother sat back in her chair, staring at the table, like it might swallow her whole. Finally, I stood. I don't want this to be about punishment, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not here to win anything. I just want to be free. Eleanor looked at Dean. That concludes our meeting. He nodded. We'll file the final paperwork today. Ms. Bennett, you'll receive formal confirmation by mail. Linda whispered something I couldn't catch. Amanda's shoulders shook, whether from anger or tears I couldn't tell. As I turned toward the door, my father met my eyes. There was nothing he could say that would change what had happened. But he gave a small nod. An unspoken apology I finally understood. I stepped out of the room. The air outside felt cooler, lighter. Sunlight cut through the clouds, spilling across the bank's glass lobby. I stopped near the entrance, breathing it in, feeling the warmth touch my face. Behind me, the muffled sound of voices continued. Eleanor wrapping up Dean, finalizing the signatures, the quiet murmur of my family's unraveling. I walked toward the exit, my reflection following me in the glass doors. Freedom didn't come with celebration. It came with silence. Sunlight and a name that finally belonged to me again. 3 months later, the Collins house stood empty. Its front yard littered with damp leaves, and a for sale sign, leaning slightly in the wind. The paint was chipping along the porch rails. The rose bushes my mother had once bragged about had wilted into thorns. Every time I passed that house in my memory, it felt smaller, like it was shrinking without the illusion of control holding it up. Linda's flower shop, once bright and full of lilies, was dark now. A sign on the glass door read, "For lease." Someone had taped over the old gold lettering, "Linda's Florals," and the tape was peeling, leaving behind the faint shadow of what used to be there. Amanda had moved to a small apartment on the east side of Portland with Ethan. Her influencer accounts were gone. Her name, once polished and constant on my feed, had disappeared completely. Robert, my father, now lived alone in a modest place in Salem. He'd sent me a card 2 weeks ago, the kind you could buy in any grocery store. Inside, his handwriting leaned slightly uneven, but sure. Proud of you. Not because you won, because you stood up. I kept it tucked between the pages of a book on my nightstand. Every time I saw it, I felt something quiet shift in my chest. Life in Seattle had fallen back into rhythm. I worked long hours at Pulse, leading the campaign that had grown beyond anything we expected. Respect. Isn't a privilege wasn't just an ad, it had become a national message. A few articles called it the campaign that changed workplace culture. The irony wasn't lost on me. On evenings when I left the office late, I'd walk home past Pike Place Market, watching vendors close their stalls, the smell of salt and coffee still hanging in the air. The city lights reflected off the bay, gold, scattered across dark water. It was the same Seattle I'd always known, but for the first time, it felt like mine. That night I came home to my apartment, the same one where everything had fallen apart, and somehow also the place where I'd rebuilt. I set my keys down, kicked off my heels, and opened my laptop. Among the work emails sat one new message. The subject line was simple. From Amanda. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The message was short. I'm sorry for everything. No excuses. No greeting. No signature. No attempt at justification. Just 6 words. I read them once, then again. My chest tightened not from anger, but from a strange, hollow understanding. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you stop needing them to understand. I deleted the message. The little ping that followed sounded final, like a door closing gently instead of slamming. The city glowed beyond the glass. Somewhere below, a ferry horn echoed across the bay. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the lights shimmer in the distance. A knock at the door pulled me back. When I opened it, Marcus was standing there with a small white box in his hands. Peace offering, he said with a grin. Inside were pastel macarons, arranged perfectly. I figured it's been a year since the video, he said, leaning against the counter. I thought cake was a bad idea. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Funny how a cake can change everything. He raised a brow. You're doing better than you think you know. I'm just doing, I said. That's enough. He stayed for a while talking about work life, the absurdity of office politics. When he left, the apartment felt calm, not empty, not quiet, in a bad way, just steady. I sat back down at my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked into the campaign folder. The first page of the presentation filled the screen. Our slogan in bold letters. Respect isn't a privilege. Below it, the image I'd chosen as the key visual, a white cake, mid-fall, frosting, blurring into motion light, catching the edges. Underneath, in small print, a line I'd written late one night. Some things have to fall so others can rise. I stared at it, my hand resting on the edge of the keyboard. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, like a heartbeat against the window. Sometimes I still heard echoes of their laughter in my head, faint and far away. But they didn't sting anymore. They just reminded me how far the sound had traveled before it finally faded. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the quiet fill the room. The glow from the screen lingered on my face for a moment before fading to black. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. The ballroom lights were warm and golden soft enough to blur the edges of the crowd. 200 people filled the seats, their faces illuminated by the stage lights. The banner behind me read in bold white letters, "Boundaries and Dignity. The Power of Silent Resilience." The host's voice echoed faintly through the microphone. "Please welcome Claire Bennett." Applause rippled across the room. Gentle, steady, expectant. I stepped onto the stage heels, clicking against the wooden floor. The sound grounding me. The air felt charged alive with that strange mixture of empathy and curiosity. People bring to stories that hurt but heal. I looked out at the audience. Professionals, survivors, advocates, people who'd lived through different kinds of silencing. For a moment, I thought of how 2 years ago, the only stage I'd known was a backyard full of laughter that wasn't mine. I took a breath and began. A while ago, at my own graduation party, a cake fell to the ground. A few soft chuckles rose, but quieted when I continued. They laughed. My mother, my sister, my nephew. Everyone thought it was funny. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. And that silence, what I thought was weakness, became the moment I learned how to speak differently. You could have heard a pin drop. I saw a woman in the front row press her lips together, her eyes shining. I used to think speaking up meant shouting, I said. But sometimes silence can be its own kind of voice. When you stop reacting, you start reclaiming. My voice steadied as I spoke, the words coming easier now. That silence cost me my family. But it gave me something I never had before, myself. The crowd was still leaning in. I'm not here because I want you to cut people out of your lives, I continued. I'm here because sometimes love demands distance. Because peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. It comes from not needing their understanding anymore. The applause didn't come right away. Instead, there was a quiet beat like everyone was processing. Then slowly it began. Soft, rising, real. A woman halfway back stood up, middle-aged, her hands trembling slightly. Her voice cracked as she said, "You gave me courage to leave my toxic sister." Something in my chest broke open. I smiled, eyes burning but dry. "We all deserve peace," I said simply. The applause returned louder this time, echoing across the chandeliers. When it ended, I stepped off stage. Lauren was waiting just beyond the curtain, her face glowing with pride. She pulled me into a quick hug. "You've turned pain into purpose," she whispered. Eleanor was standing nearby, her phone in hand, smiling the way people do when they're proud but pretending to be casual. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Justice served quietly. My favorite kind," I typed back. The quiet kind always lasts longer. After the event, I slipped away to the balcony, overlooking the New York skyline. The night air was crisp, carrying the hum of the city. Sirens in the distance, laughter rising from the street below, the clinking of glasses from the hotel bar. I leaned against the railing, watching the reflection of skyscraper lights shimmer on the Hudson. Somewhere across the city, a rooftop light blinked in rhythm steady and certain like a pulse. For a long time, I'd thought victory meant watching them regret. I used to picture Amanda scrolling through comments, my mother seeing headlines, their faces collapsing under the weight of guilt. But standing here above the noise, I realized none of that mattered anymore. Winning wasn't watching them fall. It was standing here and not feeling broken. Lauren joined me, handing over a glass of white wine. "To moving forward," she said. "To finally stopping the cycle." I replied. We clinked glasses. The reflection of the city lights danced across the surface of my drink, gold and white flickers, like pieces of something once shattered, now remade. Lauren patted my arm. "You know you didn't just tell your story today. You told theirs too, and you rewrote the ending." I smiled. "That's the thing about endings. Sometimes they're just pauses before something better starts." She laughed softly, then excused herself to greet another guest. I stayed a little longer alone with the city, and the sound of my heartbeat matching the rhythm of the traffic below. The night was alive, electric, impossibly vast. I lifted my glass, catching the reflection of the skyline. The wine caught the light, soft, fractured gold rippling through clear glass. It looked almost like the frosting on that long-forgotten cake melting under the sun. I watched it glimmer, feeling the weight of everything that had brought me here. The shame, the silence, the storm, all of it had carved a space for this light to exist. I smiled to myself, a small, quiet kind of smile. Sometimes scars don't fade. They just start to shine. The morning light in Seattle always felt gentler in spring, like it was trying to apologize for the gray that had come before. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla frosting. The room wasn't big, but it was full. 20, maybe 30 women, all different ages, sitting around a long table, covered in a white linen cloth. The air buzzed with quiet conversation, nervous laughter, the sound of healing in progress. At the center of the table sat a simple cake, white with soft, green edges, the words, "To New Beginnings," written in careful script. I'd chosen it myself. For once, I wanted the cake to stay exactly where it belonged. Unbroken, shared, celebrated. Lauren had helped organize the event through Pulse's outreach program, but today wasn't about marketing or cameras. It was just us. Women who had decided that silence didn't mean surrender. I stood at the front, my hands clasped lightly. The room quieted, the kind of hush that holds more than sound. It holds stories, too many of them familiar. When I was younger, I began someone once filmed me while I fell. They thought it was funny. A few people nodded understanding already in their eyes, but what they didn't know, I continued, was that moment didn't break me. It built me. The thing about falling is you learn how to stand better the next time. The words hung there for a moment. Then came soft applause. A few women wiped at their eyes. One woman near the end of the table reached out to squeeze her friend's hand. I smiled steady this time. You don't have to shout to reclaim your power, I said. Sometimes it's enough just to stop apologizing for existing. A round of clapping followed, louder now, freer. I felt my throat tighten, but not with sadness. It was something closer to gratitude. A feeling that maybe, after all the noise, the quiet had finally turned into something good. I walked to the table and picked up the knife. All right, I said, grinning softly. Let's cut this one together. They laughed, and we did, carefully, evenly, making sure everyone had a slice. The sound of plates clinking filled the room, the kind of sound that replaces pain with life. One woman, maybe in her 50s, looked at me as I handed her a piece. You really did start over, she said. I nodded. We all can. We just have to stop letting other people hold the pen to our story. As they ate and talked, sunlight poured through the big window behind me, the dust in the air turning to tiny flecks of gold. They filmed me once when I fell, but they never saw me rise. I could feel the words in my chest before I said them. Respect isn't a privilege, it's the bare minimum. Later, after the guests had gone, and the staff had cleared the dishes, I stayed to help fold tablecloths. Lauren hugged me goodbye at the door. You've built something beautiful, Claire, she said. And it's yours. Eleanor had sent flowers, lilies and white roses, with a note that simply read, "Proud of you." When the last of them left, I walked back to the table. Only the cake remained half gone, crumbs scattered across white linen. I ran my fingers lightly over the words that were still visible, new beginnings. I carried my coat and purse outside. The air smelled like rain, fresh and clean. By the time I reached home, the city had gone quiet. I set my bag down and poured myself a cup of coffee. The apartment looked the same as it had the day everything fell apart, but it felt entirely different now. A live, steady mine. I sat by the window, the light catching the steam rising from the mug. My phone buzzed against the table. I almost ignored it, but habit made me glance down. Group chat Collins family. The screen glowed with the words 102 missed calls. I stared at it for a second. No anger, no ache, just stillness. I pressed the power button until the screen went dark, placed the phone face down and smiled. Outside, the morning was stretching awake. I walked to the balcony barefoot, the cold concrete grounding under my feet. The bay shimmered in the distance, sunlight catching the surface like scattered glass. The air carried the faint scent of blooming magnolias. I leaned against the railing, the wind brushing through my hair, the world finally quiet. If you've ever had to choose peace over pride, you're not alone. Subscribe and share your story.